You're now rocking with the best.
Welcome.
Please welcome all of you
to StartCast.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Ian. I am the Director of Sensory Analysis for Café Imports. I've been with Café Imports for 13 years now, Director of Sensory for maybe about 11 of those. And today I'm going to talk about sensory science, cupping, tasting, coffee, communication, and wrap all that up into a new tool that we've developed and just recently released publicly called the Coffee-Rose. So to start, what is a Coffee-Rose? A Coffee-Rose is a digital cupping form. Okay? It uses a flavor wheel to describe and score coffees. More technically, the Coffee-Rose is a check all that apply test. It's a kata check all that apply test. So within the Coffee-Rose, you have a flavor wheel, and we'll circle back on what each of these things are, how they work, what they look like. We have something called a scoring engine that will generate scores for cuppers. We've built this around what I call a experiential assessment protocol. So a little bit today we want to think about not just cupping and coffee tasting, but what does it mean to set up a cupping? What does it mean to design a test called cupping? And what do you have to think about to create a cupping form for cupping? One of the things that came up for me as I was talking both to our salespeople, looking at our own experience in the cupping lab, and then talking to our sourcing crew, was a lot of cupping forms was somewhat divorced from what I would call the actual experience of cupping, the actual experience of tasting coffee. And so with the Coffee-Rose, we really wanted to look at, well, okay, what is that experience? And then can our assessment protocol match more closely with that? So we're going to look at specificity when we talk about a coffee. When I'm excited about a coffee, I tell you the specific things that I taste in that coffee, and it matters. Like if I say that a coffee in Ethiopia has apricot, that's different than just saying that it was fruity. So that level of specificity is actually really important when I'm actually talking about coffee to an actual other human. You don't necessarily get that at the same level of resolution on a legacy cupping form. Content, of course, is very, very important when we're talking about coffee. We're talking about the content of what we're tasting. So there's going to be a difference between apricot and citrus pith, for example. And then intensity. The other thing that always comes up when we're tasting and talking about coffee is how intense was the coffee and how intense was each particular thing that we're excited to be talking about because we just tasted it. The Coffee-Rose takes care of the description formation, which again, you'll see, and it introduces a transparent, and that's really important, lexicon and standards. And the transparency it's a big conversation that we've been having in specialty coffee, in particular the last few years, but it is not something that has really made its way into cupping. So if you think about the normal cupping protocol, I could come up to you on Monday and say, well, I tasted your coffee. I got citrus, I got citric acid, and I got sweetness. And I could say, and I got 87 points. And then I could come up to you on a Tuesday, and I could say, I got citrus, I got citric acid, and I got sweetness, 82 points. Same notes, wildly different value. And the reason I can do that on a legacy form is there's no index. There's no rule, there's no tie to what I say and what I score. When we talk about a lexicon and transparency in cupping, here's my soapbox, if we're going to have an industry called specialty coffee that is predicated on quality discovery, on quality premiums, but then refuse to define what quality means, I think that's an issue. I think that's a problem. So if we say, what does quality mean in coffee? And someone says, oh, it just means that it has excellent attributes, well, they haven't told you anything. And if you say, okay, well, what are excellent attributes? And they just say, well, they're distinctive. Well, they still haven't told you anything. You're still talking in circles there. So what we're going to do is we're going to, put actual numbers to the descriptors. What are numbers? Numbers are scores. Scores are our value. They're valuations. It's not they're correct. It's that they're stated. It's that they exist. It's that they're knowable. So when we talk about coffee and cupping and designing cupping systems and protocols, we have to consider that coffee is emergent. Coffee flavor expresses what are called emergent properties. Emergent properties are things that emerge when other things interact. So a normal model might say, okay, I'm going to take this coffee and I'm going to dissect it into its attributes. And that's a standard model. You could do that kind of loosely. You could do that scientifically. The issue is that specialty coffee, if we think about coffees that are special, generally incorporate attributes that don't show up in that dissection model. The special coffees of specialty coffee frequently are expressed via these emergent properties. So it's not citric acid, limonene, and some level of sweetness. It's the flavor of lemon or lime or orange that emerges in the correct interplay of those broken down attributes, right? So the dissection model fails to capture the specialty of specialty coffee. Now, the reason that people would use a dissection model, sensory science certainly will use a dissection model, the reason is that it's quantifiable, and emergent properties are very challenging to quantify. They're easy to talk about, they're what's interesting, but they're very difficult not only to quantify, but to ensure that if I get something, you'll get it, and you'll get it, and you'll get it. They're elusive in many respects. But just because they're challenging to find and challenging to quantify and elusive doesn't mean that we should pretend they don't exist, or that we can take a coffee, dissect it into 7 or 10 attributes, and then say, oh, well, now we're done. That's the coffee, that's the model. So as I mentioned, the Coffee-Rose is a check all that apply test. Check all that apply is a really interesting test for us in specialty coffee because we have this wide array of coffee tasters. We have very experienced coffee tasters, we have very new coffee tasters, and we're refreshing with new coffee tasters all the time. Kata, check all that apply, was developed for untrained coffee tasters. Traditionally, let's see, do you see my pointer? No, I gotta give you a laser. Yeah. Traditionally, still no. Oh well. The stuff up on the right, that's a traditional kata test. It's an array, it's a list of words. What makes it easy is that you taste the thing, you see the word, and you check it. Now you're done. You don't worry about scaling, you don't worry about hash marks going horizontal or vertical, you don't worry about writing stuff down or having to think of the word. You see the word, and you circle it, you exit, you check it, you're done. This is great for new tasters because new tasters can taste, but they struggle to connect the taste to the words. That's what they actually have a hard time doing. The kata test works perfectly for them. It's great for intermediate tasters because intermediate tasters frequently struggle to ground the words that they use to describe coffees. If I talk to someone, if I taste coffee with someone and I get crazy notes, crazy descriptors, I know that they're not a beginner and they're more of an intermediate taster because they're comfortable enough to say something ridiculous to me. But I also know that they're just intermediate because they're saying something ridiculous and they don't understand that while it is their experience, it's not connected to anyone else's experience. And then for experienced tasters, we actually tend to fall into word patterns. So for me at the cupping table, I've got many thousands of coffees every year. It's easy for me to just get to a row of 50 coffees from the same place and say, toffee, citric, sweet, done, toffee, citric, sweet, done, and fall into a pattern. Kata, because it shows you the language array, gives you just an instant to break out of that rut or to not fall into that rut in the first place. Coffee-Rose is a kata solution, but it is a novel kata solution. It's going to introduce some new things. There are issues with legacy check all that apply tests. One of the primary issues on a check all that apply test is because it is just a list, you have to pick between ease of use and descriptive resolution. If we come back here, you can see on the right, that's a full check all that apply test that was put together by UC Davis for coffee. There's not very high resolution there. You can't get that descriptive. Certainly you can't get as descriptive as any of us are when we taste coffees and talk about them, let alone when we describe them on coffee bags. So when we build out a lexicon that has enough language, has all the language that we try to use on a regular basis with coffee, we end up with an unwieldy list of words. So if we think about the Coffee-Rose, it's something like, if I were to make it on a list of normal paper, it's like 7 pieces of paper, 2 columns, no spacing, fine print. It's a huge list of words. And then generally kata tests also lack intensity, and sometimes that's applied, like the new SEA solution has a kata test. It is of the low resolution style, and it has intensity, but it is intensity by category. It's not intensity at the descriptor level, right? So that means the fruit category, the flavor category is intense, but it doesn't tell you, oh, well, is it the apricot that's intense and the lavender that is less intense? It just says, here are the descriptors, it's all intense. So as we get into the thing, show you what it is. We've used it internally for a year. We're a cupping lab. We do, I don't know, 6,000 or 7,000 coffees a year. We replicate everything, we blend everything, we do a lot of cupping. So it works in that. It works for that. It works for high volume. It gives us scores, it gives us notes, it allows us to be very, very, very fast, which was one of our key requirements. We've set it up so that you can do blind cuppings and open tastings, open cuppings. You can do solo or panel tastings or cuppings. It generates descriptions. One of the big things you have to think about when you think about cupping or tasting is, what am I doing it for? Am I doing it for green assessment and selection? Am I doing it for dialing in a roast? Am I doing it for what exactly am I tasting for? Generally, you want to have a test that is set up to answer the question that you're actually asking. We found that the Coffee-Rose is fairly flexible in all of those different applications, because all of those applications frequently come back to describing what the coffee tastes like, which is what the Coffee-Rose is set up exactly to do. Sharing results, I mentioned descriptor level resolution. You'll see in just a moment here, it is excellent for training new tasters because it is a interactive visual interface of a lexicon. Makes it very quick to get coffee in people's mouths and describing those coffees without the intermediary of check marks and scales going every which way, all of that. It works in really any environment. High volume labs, noisy labs, private tastings, coffee demos, etc. And so this wine writer, he's an old wine writer, I think he's dead now, Alexis Lachine, said, the best way to learn about wine is in the drinking. And part of the point of the Coffee-Rose, part of the point of this approach is we want to actually not interpose the cupping protocol, the cupping form, etc., between either the cupper and the coffee, or the cupper and the other cupper, the taster and the other taster, the assessor and the person who the assessor is talking to. When we bring new people in to train them for cupping on a legacy form, the first thing that happens is they get lost in the cupping form, and it's really apparent the cupping form is heavily interposed between them and the coffee. The other thing that happens is we get worried about the scores. We get really, really worried about the scores. And so now I'm not tasting coffee, I'm wondering what you're gonna score, and what you're gonna score, and what you're gonna score. And we find that people then are also wondering what I'm going to score. And now we're just playing this game where we're thinking about what everyone else is going to score the coffee as, and the coffee is left out of that conversation almost entirely. All right, so we're gonna just look at, I'm gonna pull up the Coffee-Rose and show you how it looks, show you how it works, and then we'll get into Q&A. So the Coffee-Rose is, as of a month ago, it is optimized for mobile. It's on your phone. And the reason I'm sitting down doing this on my laptop and not doing it the normal way is because I've got this little mobile emulator, and I just wanted to be able to demonstrate on the big screen on the phone what it looks like and how it runs. So what I'm going to do here is just walk through a quick add a flight, call up the rose, and we'll start tasting a coffee of the mind. So we can choose to be blind or not blind. I'll make it not blind and add a coffee quickly. Coffee-Rose takes the scoring out of the hands of the assessor. One of the things that we've done since 2013 or so is we've assessed different coffees on different scoring scales depending on how they're processed. So washed, natural, honey, decaf, wet hold. What that means is if you tell me that a coffee is a little bit fruity, we're gonna apply a different value to that if it's washed than if it's natural. I expect every natural coffee to be at least a little bit fruity. And so the value of not knowing that it's a natural, i.e. tasting it blind, hearing that it's a little bit fruity is lower to me than if I find out later that it was a washed coffee. It's like sitting down to taste a bunch of lagers and someone gives you the best porter or stout in the world. Well, it's not gonna rate well, no matter how good it is. You're gonna sit down and taste a bunch of cheddar cheese and someone gives you brie, it's not gonna rate well, no matter how good it is. Similar thing here. We're gonna tell it how to rate the coffee based on how the coffee was processed and by extension, what our expectation is for how that coffee will taste. I can actually name coffees anything. I'm just using the origin because it's easier. We'll do 2. Got them right there. Cup it now. So here we are. We have a Coffee-Rose. We have our 2 coffees, and they're both at 80 points. We start cupping at 80 points. 80 is the generic. It's sort of like that's where specialty starts. And so we start at 80 points. When we're scoring on the rose, start with fruit. We select what we're tasting, just like a check all that apply. Here, here, here. We look at specificity. So you can tell me it's fruity. That's a little specific, not super, but a little bit. You could tell me it's herbal, sugar browning, sweetness, acidity, bitterness, saltiness, etc. There's a little specificity there. That's about the same as a legacy cupping form when you have acidity, flavor, etc. And you can get more and more specific. The more specific you get, the higher the value that will be associated with that, or the greater the impact on the score. Things could be positive or they can be negative. Here we're going to tell it the intensity. Is it reference? Our reference is 80-point specialty coffee. Okay, it's the entry for specialty coffee. If I'm tasting raisin, dried red grape, is it noticeably, significantly, or much more? As soon as I tell it an intensity, it starts to generate a score. If I continue, cooked, citrus, not that specific, not that much, score didn't change, but here it is in my description. It's going to start parsing all of the things that I tell it I'm tasting and start to generate not only a score, but also a description. If I were to come back and say jammy stone fruit, give it a little bit more. That mild citrus note has been taken away because we're trying to talk about what drives the flavor profile of the coffee, what is interesting about the coffee, and talk about that. Back in my history, I've got everything, but in terms of how I'm going to characterize the coffee, I'm only going to be looking at the things that are driving the flavor profile. All right, I've gotten my signal. I've got like a minute. Are there any questions right now? Yes?
Do you collect the data?
I wish we could collect it better, if I was honest with you. The data all goes into a database. That database at this point is nowhere near as usable as I would like it to be. Yes.
I'm just curious because of like translating the taste, what I perceive from a certain region of the world, having a different experience
Yes.
with that fig. The one
Yes.
here, that and I had something else. So that's why I'm very curious about like how you collect the data and how you translate it, because tasting is very personal and
Yes. Yeah.
it's really paradox.
Yeah, so we do. It pushes into a database. At this point, we don't have a front end for the database, so it's just adding rows on rows. From the separation of taste perspective, I think that where we stand right now on a legacy cupping form, we have the same question, right? So we fill out our legacy form, COE, SCA, it doesn't really matter. I write fig, you write fig, I give a score, you give a score. We still have the same question about what's my experience of fig in Minneapolis, Minnesota, in the middle of the United States, where we are far removed from figs. And what might your experience of fig be? Very different thing. An even better example to me is this thing called tropical fruit, which is like people in coffee always say, oh, I got tropical fruit. And if you talk to coffee growers who live in the tropics, all fruit is tropical fruit. And they're more interested in whatever the converse would be with berries and apples and pears and such. What I would propose, what I would suggest as the advance here over the legacy system, specifically with that separation, is that in this case, one side of the equation is now shown. So I still don't know how you value fig, but when I enter fig into here, how I do or how imports values fig is now transparent, it's known. So when I was talking about transparent lexicons and standards, from our perspective, the transparency comes from the valuation being shown, right? This is what I would call the most vulnerable position for me as the cupper, is laying out my score, laying out our cards on the table. There's not really any place now for me to hide on that. And in the conversation, in that communication component, this half of that is shown. So now we actually have an easy starting point, because you could be like, well, you don't understand figs, they're like this, and you should be valuing it much higher or much lower perhaps. We can just go right off the bat from there. I mentioned that part of the groundwork for this was talking to our sourcing team, and then to a bunch of people that we source from. I keep thinking, oh, they're going to want me to, translate it and make it in French and in Spanish and in Portuguese. But in fact, they don't actually. Not one person has asked for that. What they ask for is, when can we have it? When can we use it? Because they're not interested in anything other than the transparency component. They want to know exactly how we score things, how we value things, because it eases the sourcing relationship.
Good question. Quite loud. What I find interesting on this is the home market is growing so much as well with Germany's unbelievable for the home market in terms of machines going out the door. But I think seeing home people push their palate and understanding coffee is great for the commercial side of it as well. Is that going to be available to anyone?
Yeah. So this right now, technically this is available to anyone. And in our signups, I've got when you sign up, there's like a a quick onboarding questionnaire, and the question is like, who are you or what do you do? And you can put in, I'm just like a curious coffee nerd, and there's people who do that. But this is really queued up as a more professional tool. If this is successful, then we'll take the next step and we'll make it into an actual app, not a web app. And at that point, it would be available broadly for retail. I think this would be a much more powerful tool as an app if the app version were tied back into this, as in tied back into an enterprise type system, because then it becomes a conduit for presumably you as a roaster to communicate with your users of the app at the retail end. Yeah. So yes and no, but like technically yes, but there's a huge runway there, I think, for where that could go. Absolutely.
One last, which maybe connects to the first question, because I didn't really understand how you keep, like, one thing is perception, but also the vocabulary.
Mm-hmm.
Are you open to broaden it? Or let's say when I come with people from the global south or from South America, for example, there are things which are not even in my vocabulary, I've never tasted, and
Yes.
the other way around. So do you keep developing it and add, like, foods, for example?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. These guys are going to get a little upset. All right. So there's two things there. One is from the kind of like cupping room admin perspective, right? So as it is right now in a system, in a legacy system, if it's 2018 and there's not a lot of anaerobic coffee out in the world, when you taste a coffee that tastes like vinegar and blue cheese and olives, your cuppers don't like that and they say, oh, this is bad. And then suddenly it's 2021 and anaerobic coffee is on fire and it's taking off, and it still tastes like vinegar and blue cheese and olives, but suddenly it's good. So as a cupping admin, you have to go into the cupping room and say, oh no, you guys, now this is all good. So now all your cuppers have to take and do this mental gymnastics to be like, I know what I think, I know what I'm tasting, how do I score it? How do I score it? On here, we can go into the back end and decide, oh, okay, well, olives are now good. Vinegar is now good. Our cuppers can still go into the cupping lab and describe exactly what they're tasting, the exact same. So that's from the admin side. From the expansion side, it's a little more challenging, but not that challenging to just swap out a word, add a word, remove a word. What's not getting used? Well, we could take that off we could take that off. We have, let's see, if we're gonna go to the global south, we're gonna go to tropical fruit. Every time we get out to the specific tier, we have a other button. And so a user can, even without altering the flavor wheel itself, a user can enter whatever the heck they want. This allows me as an admin to actually use that language. On a legacy form, if you tell me it tastes like gummy bears, I can't use that because I really don't know what you mean. On this, in order to tell me gummy bears, you have to tell me dried fruit, cooked fruit, fresh fruit, jammy fruit, something, tropical, gummy bears. So now I have an idea, I have context for what you're describing, and that can bridge that gap between totally different flavors that you don't even know what the fruit is. Well, they can at least have some avenue to get a little bit of the way there and give you some context. Or we have a totally different understanding of fig, so maybe I'm placing it in one place, but you're describing it consistently in a different place. That is a way that we can bridge that gap and start to actually communicate about the coffee. So I would also say that calibration is usually an exercise where we get together in a room and learn how to have everyone in the room not say what they actually think about coffees on the table. We get together, we taste the coffee, I say what I think you think, and you say what you think I think, and then we say that we're calibrated and we're not talking at all about what we actually think about the coffee. Here, I would rather say what I think and have you say what you think, and let there be that disagreement, because now we can actually start the conversation and calibrate around that and actually talk about what we're tasting together. All right, sorry guys.
Thanks for listening to this episode of StartCast.